Welcome to the Impact Over Optics podcast, a place where real progress shines beyond appearances and distractions. Here, voices from across industries come together to share wisdom, stories, and strategies that remind us what's possible when purpose leads the way. Because true progress is not measured by how it looks, but by the impact it leaves behind. Let's get started.
Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to the Impact Over Optics podcast. My name is Jon Detweiler. I'm one of the consultants with Impact Over Optics. I'm really glad that you were able to join us today for the first in a series that we're going to be doing each month. I am a leadership consultant. I've worked in southeastern Pennsylvania for the better part of my career, probably about 25 years consulting for different industries, but I'm excited to be able to do this, especially with these two guys that I'm joined with today. So let them introduce themselves.
I'm Dave Dieffenbach. I'm a technology consultant, I would call myself, and I've been doing various things in different industries for over 20 years. I consider myself somewhat of a reluctant leader, but I do enjoy leadership topics. Can't wait to share more with you guys about what I've learned and to learn from you all.
Great. Hi, all. I'm Jim Viscusi. I've spent almost 40 years now working in information technology in various roles, either as a technical contributor or as a team leader, and then eventually a leader of teams. A lot of experience work. I am working through problem solving and leadership, both in a directive and a softer way, and also doing that same sort of thing in volunteer industries, specifically in emergency services.
Love it.
And I just learned something about Jim. That's great. Didn't know that.
Awesome. So actually, before we get started, why don't we spend some time talking about what has actually brought us here to this table to talk about leadership and leading in general. So, Jon, let me start with you. What would you say is your purpose? What drives you in learning and being a leader?
You know, that's a great question. And I think a lot of leaders have to review that and focus on that because that ultimately is going to drive a lot of your behaviors. I think for me, when I look at purpose and what I want to be able to deliver, I think it comes down to legacy. I want to make sure I leave something behind. I heard somebody once say, if you want to be immortal, teach, right? Like be able to share what you have with the next generation, with the next round of leaders, with whomever. But I really want to be able to leave something that creates a legacy, a leave behind piece of me. I've been fortunate to learn from a lot of incredible leaders, many purpose-driven leaders, and I want to be able to take that back now and share that with other people. I love to be able to do that. So I think if you were to ask me what my purpose is, it is to be able to leave a positive legacy, leave the world a little bit better than how I found it. Dave, how about you?
It's a great question. And that was a really good answer. I want to start actually with the name of this podcast, because when we were first sitting around talking about this, I think I was the one saying so much of what we do in business is optics. It's about metrics. It's about sometimes vanity metrics. And I'm sort of in that second phase of my career where I'm much more focused on having an impact, having a meaningful impact. And if I had to boil down my purpose into one word, it would be connection. I seek to help other people have connection with other people, with their natural universe, understanding who you are. Leadership oftentimes is seen as a scary topic, and really about connecting to other people and understanding, to your point about legacy, it's about leaving a positive impact on the world, and connection's why I do what I do. Jim, how about you?
Yeah, that's fantastic, Dave. It's funny you guys both say something about touching people or leading with purpose. In some ways, one of the things I think the most about is when I am a leader, who am I responsible to? I am responsible to my stakeholders, obviously, who asked me to be in a leadership position. But I find myself even more concerned with the people that look to me for leadership, who look to me to set a vision for something, who look to me to break down the roadblocks, to enable them. I find that's an incredible responsibility. And the more I sort of began to understand that responsibility in my journey as a leader, I started to say, I really need to be the best I possibly can be at this, because those people are really the reason I am there. They are the thing that brings me my purpose and allows us as a team to get to the goals we've set for ourselves.
I love that. That's great. Let's do a little round robin with some questions here and asking each other. Dave, I'll throw the first one out to you. Tell me about a time that you had to make sort of an unpopular decision in order to stay true to yourself. Again, to connect with your values. Tell me about a time you had to do that.
Yeah, that's, I feel like an interview question, right? One of those challenging life questions. And I actually don't have an answer right now.
Well, that's totally fine. Jim, do you have an answer for that one?
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about that as a leadership component. I do remember a time, this was sort of mid in my career at one point, where I was working for a consulting organization that was sort of struggling to make its quarterly and year end numbers. And at one point, the manager, and I'll say this way, the manager I was working for at the time asked me to do some things with respect to our billing that they said, yeah, we'll fix it afterwards, but it'll help us right now. It was very much about the quarterly optics of what they were trying to get to. And I had a real struggle with that. And I eventually said to that person, no, I am not going to do that. I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do. And by saying that, I had a team at the time. When all of this came to light, I think it solidified our relationship as a team, because they knew that I was leading within my integrity rather than leading in the way that somebody was telling me to do something.
I love the word integrity, right? Especially in leadership. We talk so much about, the qualities of a leader, being able to motivate others, being able to sort of drive behavior and change. But I think at the end of the day, all of your currency as a leader is paid through integrity. If you are not an honest or trustful leader, people will never follow you. You'll never be able to effectively influence behavior, which is ultimately what you need to be able to do. So
I would even take that further, John. When I looked at that particular situation, it was, I am showing you the values that I want you to model rather than telling you the values that I want to model. So as we were doing future projects and vision and purpose beyond that, the team, I think, just had a little bit better sense that whatever decision or whatever ask I had for them was coming from a place of, this is what is best for us as a team and for our customer as a whole.
And if I can add, or actually go back to my brain pause earlier, because Jim, you helped me think about a situation where there's a natural tension between commercial and product in the world I'm in. And it's a pretty bold leadership thing to try to recommend a change in timeline. So especially with agile software, in the world I'm in, oftentimes people want to know an exact date. And the experience I remember where I had to make an unpopular decision is we had a very, very important software release coming out. And there were a couple things that just weren't quite right. And the decision to delay and having to stand up in front of other folks, it was really important to the long-term success of the product. It would have been ultimately wrong to the ultimate stakeholder, the customer. But I was mid-career, and it would have been very easy to say, let's put this out there and see what happens. And instead, I had the opportunity to say, let's do the right thing by the customers. Let's wait a month. I took a few battle scars for that, but that was a tough but important learning for me, that sometimes you have to slow down to go fast. Is what I would oftentimes say.
So can I ask you a follow-up on
Please,
that?
yeah.
How did that impact the team around you? Did you feel as though that built credibility with you? How did that actually play out?
The direct team felt great because I went to bat for them for the integrity of the product. I didn't say this or that person caused us to be late. It was a little bit of a hiccup with the commercial team, right? It took us a while to rebuild trust with them because they wanted high predictability. The core team I was working with, the people who were building the software, creating the training materials, that was a very positive model behavior that I showed them. The other ones, I could get them back to where I was. Right? We got to a point of predictability again, but the team I was with knew that I would always have their best interests in mind. And ultimately, the way I work is I always go back to that ultimate stakeholder, both trying to satisfy the team I have, but also making sure I'm never making decisions that dissatisfy the customer, at least intentionally.
I love it.
What a great balance you were able to bring together with that. So can you talk about maybe how you led with that team that didn't, had their trust betrayed in a way, right? Where you had to step back, you had to rebuild that trust. How did you do that as a leader?
Thank you for that. That's goes back to my early why. It's that thing I've learned throughout my career is connection. So, and I'll be honest, and I might weave this in a lot, that the modern asynchronous and Zoom world is harder to do this, but it's a lot about one-on-one connection building. So it's about, I used to say in the office I used to work in was a large office with lots of rooms. And I used to wait for someone to leave a room because I knew there would be, and I'd walk with them to the next room. And so a lot of it was just that conversation around, do you want to grab a cup of coffee? Do you want to take 5 minutes and talk about this? That one-on-one conversation allows you to really connect with a person on a specific level. They know that I'm not just trying to assert my dominance, because that's not really who I am, in trying to understand my point of view. But also, I did learn from that for future releases, I needed to spend more time with them earlier on so that they never felt surprised. So if I had a sense, and if I go back and am truly honest, I probably had a sense that release was going to need to be delayed. And I probably surprised a few folks, which going forward, it was more about building the relationship, having one-on-ones, doing the attack mode hallway conversations, which I used to love. That went a long way to just building that trust where they knew that I was going to speak honestly, and openly if they would slow down, put their books down, and give me the moment to talk to them.
I love it. And again, I love talking to other leaders who have experienced trust building and all those pieces through mistakes, because I will be the first to admit I probably made way more mistakes than the two of you, but we do. We make mistakes as leaders. And I think early on as young leaders, we really focus on I don't want to make mistakes and my job needs to be perfect. And it creates this unrealistic stress that we internalize into ourselves. I wish that I had, as a young leader, not focused so much on that and took more time to talk with people, build trust, focus less on outcomes, and really focus on building relationships. Because that hallway walk, again, it may have comprised 13 seconds of your day with that person, but that was probably a massive investment in the relationship.
Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't charging by the hour back then. Jim, I think I actually want to put that question back to you as well. Stakeholders, right? How do we keep them aligned when maybe progress isn't highly visible to them? How do you best find that you keep those stakeholders aligned so you don't run into my issue?
Right. So that's an interesting thing. And I think one of the things we'll probably talk about at some point is metrics, right? And so there's two ways that I try to do it. I'm a very data-driven person. I've worked for a data software company for many, many years in my career. So a lot of things I look at are based on the concepts of KPIs or OKRs. And where I'm trying to go in one way in my conversations is, here are how we're building. And then don't assume this is a linear curve. Once we get through those sort of startup things, you'll see this curve really, really ramp up over time. But then a lot of times you don't have that data to show. Either you haven't figured out or agreed on the metrics, or you haven't figured out that you're making progress in those right areas. So the other part of that leadership becomes the vision of the project that you painted with that stakeholder in the first place. Either they've given you something and you've given them a solution, or you've said, I want to bring this project forward, and they have to come back to you. So when I am stuck in that space, I come back to storytelling. Look, I understand we're not showing the progress you want us to see. Here's the reasons, here's the difficulty, and ultimately we are still trying to execute on this vision. So vision becomes available through the connections that I hear you talking about. You and I have to trust each other as a leader-stakeholder relationship before you'll even listen to my story and give me the grace if necessary.
I love the fact that you just brought in that connection, and I appreciate that at all. Try to do anything you've learned as well from that?
Probably more lessons in that I'd really want to talk about. No, I think, again, when it comes to aligning your stakeholders, being able to, again, go back to that communication and connection piece is so very valuable. And when you can build the relationships, it makes it better. It sets that stage to be able to have those conversations and to be able to listen and receive and process.
Yeah. And I want to go back to the this narrative thinking you just brought up too. I'll be honest, and I'm going to be honest throughout this podcast. They bore me. And people, this is why impact over optics, I should say, is so much more important to me. When you can put a story to metrics, though, take people back to why the KPI matters, not just revenue.
Right.
But if from in my industry, for instance, if you can tell me why the pet owner is going to have a better experience with the veterinarian because of that metric, it means so much more to me. So I think that's helpful too when you're talking to the stakeholders, to not just talk about the number, not just why that number is important to the bottom line, because of course that's important, but that narrative thinking where you're telling the story behind it. It's also important to bring that customer in, and everyone has an element to the story too. But if you just look at numbers, it's pretty boring work at times. So I love the fact, Tim, that you brought up that storytelling as part of how we manage stakeholders.
What's funny in that is, in my way of looking at it, if I come to you with a story, but I don't have data to back my story up, I'm just coming to you with, we've talked about integrity, we've talked about vision. I'm coming to you with an idea of purpose, but I, in my way of selling a story, don't have a good way to do that unless I have something that I can say. And this is how I will show you that we have made progress, or this is how I will eventually be able to describe to you that we're getting towards the goal that I am saying, or you are saying you want us to see at the end of the day.
That's great.
So let me ask a question of both of you, since you kind of brought up the why. Insanix speaks a ton about why, and using that as your driver to get you to your ultimate destination, whether that be through a product or through a service that we offer, but really understanding the why, using that as leverage to drive your team. Do you guys have a good example of how your why, and whether that is as a leader or something that's been brought down to you through corporate, what is your why that helps you drive your teams? How do you get them to see the why and leverage that moving forward?
Well, I'm gonna broaden that a little bit more too, because my why is important. But for me to really work with a team, I really have to understand their why as well. So I like to share my why, and oftentimes I do it through the voice of the customer. I'll bring back and say, I just talked to Samantha at such and such practice, and she wants this, and this is why this is important. But in my experience, I like to understand their why as well, so I can make it a team why, because everyone has a different why. And maybe it's easy in my industry because we're all pet owners, or many of us are, so we can relate to that. But I think that's a pretty important piece. They should know who I am. I'm not talking about sharing every personal detail I have, but they should know enough about me to know, for instance, that metrics are important to me, but they're not my most important thing. I'd rather understand the story behind it. But I also want to share with them in a voice that they understand. And this is actually helping me right now, because I'm realizing some of the challenges I have in a current consulting opportunity is I keep sharing these great ideas that are informed by my past experience. And I'm now sitting with you and I'm seeing confusion in some of my stakeholders' eyes because they don't have my past experience, right? And we all need to figure out how to connect what our stories are to some way the other person can relate to them, and not just assume that our story is going to excite them.
That's great.
Let me pull that in a different
Of
direction,
course.
right? So I'm thinking to a past experience with a customer when I came into managing an operations team. And at one point in the operations team, one of the things that was immediately given to me by the stakeholders around me, not my team itself, was transparency in solving problems. In other words, the ticketing system that we use was completely opaque to the external users. We could see all the details internally, but our customers had no idea of the progress of whatever they were doing. That left in frustration. So one of the things that I kind of immediately did was say, we need to change this narrative. We need to make sure that our customers understand where they are, what they're getting, when they're going to get their level of service, and how we're going to give them that information. My team didn't have that. They were used to their ticketing software. That was what worked for them. I had to get them to find the customer's why along the way. They had to see that why. So it was externally driven for them. It didn't come from them. Although eventually what happened is, as they stopped getting complaints about their ticketing service and actually started getting praise for, not only are you solving these things even more quickly than you ever did, but you're solving them in a way that I know what's happening and I understand that and I can be involved with you in that process. That very immediately changed their behavior because their why could then be influenced by the customer as opposed to, I just got a ticket and I got to solve it. To your point earlier about connection, it allowed them to build that connection. So externally driven, connection based, they felt better about what they were doing. And then at the end, we actually implemented a survey system. So our customers then said, yeah, I was actually really happy. I knew what was happening in my ticket and I was appreciating how quickly you guys actually worked to solve my problem. Their response, their morale, their engagement went through the roof because now it was a two-way communication.
You eventually got to their why.
I
Right?
did.
Do you guys mind if I shift gears a bit? I want to ask John a question
Yeah,
and I'll come
absolutely.
around the table. But we had a great conversation this morning over breakfast or over coffee where Jim was talking about how memory is something we constantly are regenerating, rewiring. And in leadership, we have a lot of expectations. And sometimes we learn things and then we have to unlearn them. And I'm wondering, in your experience, John, what's a major lesson or many lessons that you've had to relearn? Some misperceptions you had about leadership, and then you had to unlearn them in order to become a more effective leader.
Well, I think especially as a young leader, probably one of the biggest struggles that I had, and I'd be curious if you guys sort of experience the same thing, is when you're given authority, all of a sudden you feel like you need to let people know, right? Like, I'm going to let you know that I'm the boss. And that comes out of insecurity for young leaders that feel as though they need to explain that. Somebody once said to me, if you need to tell them your rank, you really don't own it, which is true. I think that there's a lot of honesty behind the fact that your presence should be able to sell who you are and what you are. So I think the biggest unlearning that I did was sort of how I branded or shared myself. Who did I want to be? Did I want to be an authoritarian leader, or did I want to be a servant leader or a transformation leader? I think as I have gone through several iterations of the leader that I am, it's been exactly that. Like, unlearning, no, the autocratic approach doesn't work. I don't have to pound my hands on the table and tell you that I'm in charge, but really finding out how you can best motivate people. Because again, I truly do believe at the end of the day, your goal as a leader is to influence and motivate behavior. That's it. That's what you do. And if you're ineffective in one way of doing that, you need to continue reinventing yourself to find that way. That is a great question though.
Jim, you have any, I'm sure you do, anything you've unlearned?
So John brings up an interesting point. I learned it as a directive leader, right? And I remember early on in my career being a directive leader in the sense that I, as the leader, had to have the answer, had to set the tone, had to make it all happen for the team. And that was very wrong. And the piece that I learned through that probably the most was a lot of humility, and a lot of humility that came from a lot of embarrassment and a lot of frustration and a lot of anger and a lot of irritation with people's behaviors, until I turned that mirror around and looked at myself and said, maybe the problem is more centralized over time. Maybe as you get into some of what do people want? They want autonomy. They want mastery. They want purpose in their lives. Okay, great. How am I as a leader giving that to them? And it's not telling them what to do. It's asking them what they think should be done and how we can best solve that. And once I learned that, or unlearned the other behavior that John was alluding to, it was a lot easier to start letting people be themselves and be much better as a result.
Okay, since you asked a good question, totally playing it back. What did you have to unlearn through your process?
I was hoping you were going to ask that actually. Well, there's a couple of different ways of approaching this. One is you learn after a while that the best player on the team isn't necessarily the best leader. And if I go back to sports, the soccer player who's just the best player on the team isn't necessarily the best captain and is rarely the best coach. They're so focused on what they're doing. They're really good. It happens in business a lot. We take our highest performer and we promote them to a point of leadership, and they aren't trained on the skills. So I think one of the major things I had to learn is that leadership isn't always intuitive. You have to learn some of those skills. And maybe that's the purpose of this podcast. The expectation that you take a great individual contributor and just assign them a title isn't enough. And so I definitely had to unlearn that expectation that senior leaders must have just been born with it. And rather than assuming that I knew the way, my story I oftentimes tell is the first time I was brought into leadership, it was given an open head count. I went off and hired the person. It was definitely the wrong person. And then 3 weeks later, they put me through leadership training. And I learned all the things I'd done wrong in hiring that person. My favorite part of that story is a year later when I changed that position, I handed that poor performer to the next person who had to perform a lot at the companies. He and I have a long-standing, it still wasn't my fault, right? I didn't know how to be a leader yet. I had to learn. But the biggest part I had to unlearn is that it's not just a natural progression into leadership. It's a skill. You have to spend the time to learn it, to listen to other people, and not just to expect it to be easy, because it's not.
So guys, this has been incredible. I am super excited to be able to offer this out and continue to do this. So from a formatting standpoint, for the rest of this month, we will be interviewing individual contributors. So you'll get an opportunity to hear Jim do an interview, Dave do an interview, and I do an interview. They'll be released every week. So please, we would love for you to follow along. The one question I love to ask every guest that we have, and we'll ask it amongst ourselves here, is if the listeners walk away today with just one message, what do you want that to be?
Be curious. Be continually curious about your leadership style, how you're acting as a leader, where you are communicating your information as a leader to both your teams and to your stakeholders.
I would say, be patient. Be patient with yourself. Be patient with your teams. To actually make an impact, it does take time. It takes coordination, and it's not as easy as it looks, but when it happens, it's really a sweet spot.
I love it. And I think if I were to say anything, I would say what I want people to take away is, especially when it comes to leading with purpose, be clear on what your values are and be clear on what you want, what's going to drive you as a leader and who you want to be. So again, great conversation, guys. Thanks for your time today. We look forward to catching up with you in a week. Take care.
Thanks again for joining us on the Impact Over Optics podcast. We hope today's insights sparked fresh ideas and reminded you of the power of purpose-driven work. Please share this episode with others who believe in real change, and join us again as we continue to look beyond appearances and focus on the impact that truly lasts.